There are 47 apps sitting on your phone right now. A streaming app with more shows than you could finish in 3 lifetimes. A podcast for, like, literally any subject a human has ever cared about. And yet somehow, you're still bored. So let me ask you something almost nobody stops to ask. What did ancient humans actually do when boredom hit them? Not people from the Middle Ages. Not the Romans. Not even the Egyptians. We're going way, way further back than that. 100,000 years. 200,000 years. Back before writing existed. Before art, before music, before language looked anything like it does now. Just people sitting around with absolutely nothing to do. And the answer flips almost everything you assume about creativity, about religion, and about why your brain is wired the way it is. But before any of that, one question has to come first. Did boredom even exist back then? Believe it or not, this is a real argument among scientists. For decades, the standard assumption was that our oldest ancestors were simply too busy staying alive to ever feel bored. Every hour of daylight went into hunting, gathering, patching together shelter. Downtime didn't exist. Except that assumption was wrong. Spectacularly wrong. In 1966, the anthropologist Marshall Solins released a paper that turned the whole idea upside down. He'd spent years living among the sand people of the Kalahari Desert. One of the last communities on the planet, still living in a way that resembles how humans originally lived. And here's what the numbers showed. They worked. And on average, somewhere between 15 and 20 hours. Not a day, a week. Everything else was rest, conversation, sitting, doing nothing much at all. Solins gave them a name, the original affluent society, not because they owned a lot, because they were rich in time. More free time, honestly, than most of us will ever see. So the real question was never whether early humans got bored. The question is, what they did once they were. Let's begin with the most obvious answer. They played. Sounds simple, right? Well, it really isn't. In 2010, the archaeologist Francesco Dorico and his team examined a small collection of shells dug up from a site in South Africa. And it's a place known as Blombos Cave. Those shells were 75,000 years old. Each one had a hole bored through it, and each had been smeared with red ochre. They weren't tools. They weren't weapons. They weren't anything you could eat. They were beads. Some person, 75,000 years ago, with nothing better on their plate, sat down and crafted themselves a piece of jewelry. That is the oldest known work of art in the human record. And it began with boredom. Now here's the detail that really gets me. Making beads like that would have eaten up hours, maybe like whole days. Grinding a hole through a shell with nothing but a stone tool. No electricity, no metal, no patience trained by a lifetime of constant entertainment. That is one seriously long afternoon. And they did it regardless, because the only other option was staring at a cave wall. Art wasn't born from necessity. Boredom gave birth to it. You see the exact same thing happen with music. In 2008, a team excavating a cave in southern Germany pulled out a flute. It had been carved from the wing bone of a vulture, 5 finger holes along its length. It was 40,000 years old. So picture it. Someone 40,000 years ago, long before farming, long before cities, long before any society we'd actually recognize, sat down and invented music, not out of need. They just had an empty afternoon and a hollow bird bone. And it turns out music is basically what the brain reaches for when it has nothing else to chew on. So the neuroscientist Daniel Levitan, who studies where music comes from, makes the case that our knack for music is actually older than language itself. Our brains were tuned for rhythm and melody before we could string together a complicated sentence. Because rhythm is pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is the thing that kept us breathing. But boredom didn't stop at art and music. It produced something even more powerful. Stay with me on this. You can't actually, be bored without having a sense of time. To feel bored, you have to recognize that this moment is dragging on too long, that something else could be happening instead, that there's a future out there, and it might be better than this. In a very literal way, boredom is the first clue that our brain has learned to imagine things that don't exist yet. Animals don't experience boredom the way we do. A dog waiting by the door for its owner isn't bored. It's just, waiting. It has no mental picture of the other things it could be doing. But a human, sitting in a cave 100,000 years ago, watching the fire, with nothing to fill the hours, starts to think, what if tomorrow's hunt falls apart? What if that noise outside is something hunting us? What's on the far side of that mountain? Where do we go after we die? Every question religion has ever raised. Every question philosophy has ever chewed on. Every question science is still trying to crack. All of them trace back to the same root. Somebody got bored, and their mind started to drift. In 2013, the psychologist Sandy Mann published a study, and it showed that boredom gives a real, measurable boost to creativity. She made people do the dullest task she could think of, copying numbers straight out of a phone book, and then tested how creative they were right after. The bored group blew everyone else away, because boredom pushes the brain to manufacture its own stimulation. And the brain, when you leave it alone, is genuinely incredible. But there's one last thing ancient humans did when boredom set in. And it might be the one that mattered more than all the rest. They talked, not about hunting, not about food, not about who's carrying what tomorrow. They told stories. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar, the same person who found that human social groups naturally top out at around 150 people, spent years digging into what we actually talk about when we're not talking about anything that matters. What did he find? Well, so around 65% of all human conversation is basically social gossip. Who did what? Who said what? What happened to that person you both know? Sound like a complete waste of breath, doesn't it? It wasn't. Dunbar's argument is that language didn't evolve for practical communication at all. It evolved for social bonding. Before language, primates bonded by grooming each other, physically. Hands in fur, but grooming is slow, and it's, one-on-one. You can only groom a single friend at a time. Language took grooming's place. Suddenly, you could bond with 3 people at once, 10. A whole circle around a fire. You could tell a story about someone who wasn't even in the room. You could build trust with people you'd never laid a finger on. And so human civilization didn't take off because we needed to organize the hunt. It took off because we were sitting around with nothing to do and we started talking about each other. Boredom invented gossip. So look at where this trail has taken us. 75,000 years ago, someone bored in a cave made a bead. 40,000 years ago, someone bored in another cave made a flute. And somewhere between the two, people sitting around fires with empty hours started asking questions nobody could answer. About death, about the sky, about why anything is the way it is. Some of those questions grew into religion. Some grew into science. Some grew into art. And some of them became you. Lying awake at 2 in the morning, phone resting on your chest, thinking about nothing in particular. Here's the part that rarely gets mentioned. Modern psychology actually has a name for what happens when you wipe out boredom entirely. They call it cognitive overload, when every single moment is filled with stimulation. The brain never gets the window to do the thing it was actually built for in the quiet stretches. Process, consolidate, create. There's a system in your head called the default mode network. The part that, switches on when you're doing nothing at all. It's the same network behind creativity, behind self-reflection, behind empathy, and it only fires up when you're bored. We spent 300,000 years teaching ourselves to fill the silence with something that mattered. Then we built the smartphone, and we've been cramming that silence full ever since. But every time you set the phone down and just sit with the empty space for a second, every time your mind starts to wander and you actually let it go, you're doing the very same thing that person in the cave was doing. The same thing that produced the bead. The same thing that produced the flute. The same thing that looked up at the stars and started asking why. Boredom never held ancient humans back. It's the thing that made them human. And if you let it, it might just be doing the same thing for you.